Hey everyone, it's Dale with the WebPub class, and today I want to take some time talking about web design principles. We've discussed some of this stuff in class already. We've discussed a lot of it already, but I want to reinforce it as you're continuing to work on with your projects, especially when it comes to the look and the structure of your site. These are incredibly important things, and they can make or break when someone decides whether they're going to stay on your site or not. So it's really important, and we're going to continue to cover them today. The overall goal with web design is what's called usability. Do people want to and can people use your website? If you make this beautiful website that no one can figure out and no one can use, the website is a failure because no one can use it. So usability is the key. Personally, I would rather have a minimalistic, very usable site than a incredibly ornate site that no one can figure out. Now, if you can find the happy medium between those two and still have a site that looks incredibly great and is easy to use, then you've hit the holy grail of web design. So when it comes to usability, it is the measure of the quality of a user's experience when interacting with a product or system. So, like I just said, if somebody can use your site, then you have high usability. If they can figure out where to go, if they can understand your navigation, if they know, okay, if I click here, I'm going to go here, these are all things to consider when it comes to usability. And there are 5 things to consider with your website regarding usability. Ease of learning. Remember, when we're writing content on a site, we're essentially trying to help people with information. So if someone can understand your content and can use your website to learn, that leads to high usability. Efficiency of use, that goes along with the navigation and just the overall structure of your site. If they can't find where you want them to go, your site is not usable. So making sure it is as clear as possible in terms of letting people know how to use your site, that leads to high usability. Memorability, you want people to remember your site, especially when you're coming up for job interviews. If you are up against a couple of other candidates and they went to your digital portfolio and they really remembered your site, that's going to put you above the others. So for just that reason, you should want your site to be incredibly memorable. Error frequency, you obviously want that to be really low. A low error frequency means high usability. So this is everything from coding errors to errors in navigation, everything regarding errors on your site. You want them as low as possible. And then finally, subjective satisfaction. This is just if people like your site. Is it a nice site? Do you like it yourself? Do people, your customers, like it? So you want to consider those 5 things when it comes to usability. Now, there are 4 elements for web design: page layout and structure, fonts and typography, color, images, and graphics. We're going to go over each of these individually. Let's start with page layout and structure. There are a ton of ways you can structure a site. Here are just a couple of examples. And you're learning this more as we've gone into Bootstrap and you've seen, some other examples of a grid layout and something like that. This bottom left or bottom right with all the multiple squares, let's look at that first. That would be something that would be kind of like a store image, or a store site. If you imagine different items here that people can click on and go to the individual sites. This would resemble maybe a news site. You've got a huge area here for content with a banner. This is this resembles our school website. If you think about it, we've got the main header, and then we've got a couple of layouts for content. And this is a pretty standard site here. We've already built one very similar to this for your second project. So again, there are a ton of ways to design a site. These are just 4 examples. So getting the structure laid out before you start building is incredibly important, and it's going to help you place the content where you need it to be, and it adds to that usability because you have a plan in place. Your Couple of things to consider when you're thinking about layout and structure. The content on your page has to show in the browser when people load the page. So if you've built this huge site that continues to go all the way off the screen, that is a disaster. People are not going to scroll, especially scroll horizontally. So, in other words, you want to keep your content contained. So this is where that container div might come into play, so that you know, okay, I'm only 800 pixels wide. That is smaller than the size of most people's screens. So I know my content is going to all show up when somebody visits my site. So you really have to pay attention to that. A couple of other things to consider with layout and structure. You want to know what all is on your page. So this should look very familiar, especially when you think back to Project 2. You'll need a header, a navigation system, your main content, and a footer. So this is what we used all the HTML5 tags to structure that content. So again, this should not be anything new. You've already done this in class with your project, but this will continue to go on as you continue to build more and more sites. Take a look at these two sites and which one looks more appealing to the eye. Hopefully you think this one does, because the content is structured in a way that is easy to read and consistent more than anything. This has, head over here, then you've got navigation that's off to the side, and you've got some pictures that are justified, others that are centered. It's kind of a mess in terms of the layout. But here you have clean edges. You have the image here, content, image, content, image, content. You have a line separating them all. Very well laid out. You'll also notice that the content is not justified across the screen. You do not want that in web content. So just let it go and carry over to the next line. Okay, when it comes to fonts and typography, we use fonts and typography on the web. Do we use them to make content easy to read, or do we use them to make web pages look pretty? I'll go ahead and stop there for a second so you can think about that. Hopefully you answered both, because that's truly the answer. But of those two options, this would be the main one. So we do want our fonts and our typography to help our sites look pretty, so I don't want to do that. But if your content is not easy to read, the prettiness of your fonts do not matter. So the answer is both, with more emphasis on this first one. And as you know, we can tell a browser which font we want to use. So this is done through CSS, and as you've already done, you can define the body inside your CSS and then have a font family. And what this does is it gives the browser an order of the way you want them. So what this is saying is, I want you to use Arial. If the user does not have Arial on their computer, use Helvetica. If the user does not have Helvetica either, use any sans serif font. So you can go ahead and set up this order in your CSS to let the browser know which type of font you want used. Again, remember, pixels are the way we measure fonts. And here, we just mentioned sans serif. Here are those two different font families. We have serif fonts, which have this little line and these extra ornate things on them. And then sans serif do not have that, so it's more clean edges. So it really just depends on your preference. Times New Roman, the default font in Microsoft Word, is a serif font. And then Arial, which is a very common font as well, it is sans serif, meaning it does not have them. Okay, let's talk about colors for a second. And the main thing here is, when you have too many colors on your site, you have no color, because you really want color to serve a purpose. Color is not on your site to show that you love really loud colors or that you like a bunch of different colors. You want the color to either draw the eye of someone, to show attention to one thing. You want it to be consistent, so you don't want hot pink on one page and then yellow on another page and then orange on another page. You want your site to have a consistent color thread. So again, too many colors equals no color. Please remember that. We've already talked about this as well. We measure colors in the RGB frame. So R stands for red, G stands for green, B stands for blue. And the hex codes, as we've discussed several times, a lot of information there on the screen that you should already know. We measure these hex codes in from everything from 0 to 9 and then A to F. So we actually have millions of possibilities, 16 to the 16th number of possibilities when you consider all the different red, greens, and blue shades. So the first two represent the red, middle two represent green, and the third group represents blue. So if you have FF0000, you're going to have red. If you have 00FF00, F stands for full, by the way, you'll have green, and then 0000FF would be blue. Black is the lack of any color. White is the presence of all color. So you should already know this by now. We've discussed RGB colors throughout the semester. But here are a few other things to consider that when it comes to tying in colors. You might want to pick a main color and then have different shades or tints or tones of that color throughout your site. So a tint is when you add white to a color. So you can see we have this color here, and then we have these different tints where we're continuing to add white to it, and this works as a color scheme throughout your site. When you add a shade, you're adding a black to it. So you can see we have the same color here, but we're now adding a little bit of black to each site, or to each one, and we're just changing the color code here. And so that would work as a color scheme as well. And then tones are when you add gray to it. So again, same thing. You can see this works as a color scheme. Each color or each tone continually getting a little bit more gray. And there are several places where you can go to find out which colors work together. Again, we've talked about the Cooler Adobe site before, Color Blender. You can go there. You can also go here if you want to just find out if the tones of or if there's enough contrast between two colors. So use these sites to your advantage. There are a ton of color sites on the web. If you don't like these, find one that you do like. There are countless number of possibilities when it comes to resources in terms of colors. And finally, let's talk about images and graphics on your site. The main thing is the image size should be small. You usually do not want an image size that is more than 100 kilobytes. This is because anything higher than that, it might take somebody a while for that image to load. And that goes back to usability. If it's taking a while for your images to load, think about when you go to a site and it's taking forever for the images to load. You think, man, what's going on with this site? I don't like it. So you want those images to load quickly. If you have a graphic with limited color or a small logo, that file size is usually a 20 kilobyte file. So the smaller the file size, the better. Remember, unless you're doing a photography site or anything like that, people are not expecting the highest of high quality images on your site. So yes, the image should still look good, but you don't want that file to be so big that people can't load it. You also want to make sure and use the appropriate file formats. For most photos, it's either going to be JPEG with the E or without the E. Both are the same. It just depends on how you have the image saved, so make sure you're paying close attention to that. Sometimes files are saved in different programs with the E and sometimes without. So if you're having a problem with one of your images not showing, make sure that you have the proper extension. And when you build graphics, use either a GIF file or a PNG file. If you don't have a lot of color on it, you're going to want to use it as a GIF file, and then PNG is high quality. So if you're building a logo or a graphic for your site and it's not very extensive in terms of colors, you can go ahead and save that as a GIF file as well. One final note, optimize your images in Photoshop before you upload them to the web. Photoshop or Pixlr, I'm fine with you using either one. You want these images to be ready to go before you upload them to your site and put them in your site. So there you have it, a few notes on design principles. Make sure you're applying all of these things to every project you build in this class.